time for another round of Brandy. Candid conversations over cocktails about all things brand. With your hosts, Reilly Newman and Scott Saunders, the brand developers behind Motif Brands.
All right. It being the most wonderful time of the year, as this year, 2024, being a political year, is that what you call it?
It's a political year. It's a big year. The presidential primaries are coming up.
'Tis the season.
Or I should say, not the primaries. I mean, primary election.
It's the big show, is what they call it.
The big show is coming
on
up
the hill
this November, and it just brings to mind, and we brought this up in the past about how even a person, has a brand in a sense. Celebrities have brands, right?
Yeah.
How they're perceived, how they align themselves with brands or products or endorsements. I forget when, but we got started talking about it, how even just with political identities, political branding, candidates branding, right?
I think that was the brand phases one, where we talked about even politicians or them going through the phases of brand. So in honor of the festivities of of the election cycle, our episode today is focusing on, obviously, politics and brand and marketing.
Yeah.
Especially because so much money flies around with it. Like, we were looking up some stats, and it's a great sum of cash that really goes into these machines every 4 years. And everything from presidential to Congress and Senate, it's a lot of money.
Well, and how much it's even like exponentially getting increasing.
Yeah.
I think the numbers we were looking at, like 2016 to 2020, in just 4 years, it doubled. It was went from like 8 billion to over 16 billion, and this is total, spent. And I think too, I like to just kick this off too for the people that are tuning in too. Is like, we're going to be talking about politics and branding, but this is going to be political. This isn't the platform or the place or time to push our own ideologies or anything like that. But I think it's just taking an objective look to see where does branding come into it in terms of an election or candidates, marketing, right?
Yeah.
But branding has a place with political seasons and political cycles.
Yeah, and I feel like the big kickoff to that was in the 2008 with Obama, is when you saw a huge increase of just marketing and brand and actually designed identity.
Taking it to a new level, really.
Yeah.
Because I think even so much as, usually candidates have had word marks created with their last name, and you see them on bumper stickers and posters and
red, white,
yard
and blue
signs and all that stuff. And that was the first time that an agency was utilized. And within even I did a little research. It took about 2 weeks it was a quick turn project, but to work out the logo mark for Barack Obama and the Biden ticket, which with the O and the flag at the bottom of it. And that was something new. I mean, it was obviously a monogram logo, but no one had really, looking over the years previous during the 90s and 80s and before that, it was never treated like that.
No.
And I think the other thing that really stood out to me, because I've seen so many parodies of it since, and I've even made a parody of it, utilizing that look, was the famous Obama Hope poster.
Yeah.
Designed by Stephen Ferry, I think it was. But that with an interesting color palette. Mm-hmm. And the way it was rendered, and it became very just like so iconic that there have been spin-offs since then. One of my favorites being, an image of Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker, and it says "A New Hope" instead of just "Hope." Or, and so but that striking color palette became so signature, so identifiable. Dark navy, a dark red, and a cream rather than white.
Yeah.
And the way the poster was created, it was just different. No one had done something like that before, and it became super memorable.
And it makes you think: was there politically in the political realm, was there ever a candidate brand that did that, where it made that extension to the poster is its marketing material,
Right.
of this extension into the marketing realm of, okay, it's not just the logo replastered, because that's usually what you see. I feel like is that the candidate will come up with a little logo that almost looks like a crest, like a toothpaste logo, where it has like red, white, and blue, a little squiggly in their last name or something, and then the year. But this is like kind of the first time where you're not seeing that as much, and then you see a great logo, and then it's backed up by these really interesting marketing materials like that poster.
Yeah, like signature visual identity.
Yeah.
That became to represent the candidate or the platform. And it always cracks me up every time, and more particularly, I think, in the local elections. But I always, whenever there's a local election and I start seeing yard signs pop up, and whether it's for mayor or city council or whatever, I always crack up to see what are some of the designers out there going to be doing, and how are they going to use stars and stripes? How are they going to use navy red and red, white, and blue? Because it just becomes so the same. And I have yet to see a candidate do something like a bright lime green and plum purple and an orange or something obscure to signify their campaign. And that we're just talking obviously visual branding. There's a lot that goes into that, but I think just like with everything else, with brand in general, when you're doing what everyone else is doing, again, it becomes white noise. It's like, oh, we've got a caption, a snappy slogan, and then their last name, and there's the design, and that's going to sell them as a candidate. And granted, there's some complexities to coming up with political campaign materials. There's approaches and do's and don'ts and what to. But I think it's a matter of, just like with every other. The way when we talk about brand, we talk about clarity, we talk about distinction, we talk about finding a niche, and I think this brings up a point, since we're talking about branding and political, is that it's one of those things where with brands we always say, hey, don't try to be something to everybody, right?
Yeah.
But I'll bring this point up with political branding, with political identities. You kind of need to shoot for being something for everybody, being the choice for everybody, and it's we tend not to. It gets very it can be very one-sided, one side of the aisle. Candidates talking to is already a fan base or their base, right? And it's more of, I feel like nowadays even, fast forward to current times where I think political campaigns are so much different now in 2024 or even 2020 than they were previous decades. It used to be, an election year, it was all about percentages in polls, and even the slightest instance of a scandal or controversy that would arise could end up being the demise for a political candidate. And it seems like now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like now all politicians, whether Democratic or Republican or independent, it seems like politicians are a lot more bulletproof from that. And it's interesting as someone in branding and talking about political brands, why that is, how that is.
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of the human aspect. I think that social media has done is that the polish, the veneer that you got back in the Kennedy time or Reagan is like this fake, perfect politician, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing all that stuff. It's like that's kind of eroded. And again, that makes sense politically from a strategy standpoint, because you want to appeal, like you said, to being human, to being just like the people, to be just like, hey, I'm just one of you guys, and I just happen to be running for office, which is far from reality, but that's part of the strategy. So them showing their flaws, them showing mistakes and whatnot, and them recovering from that, I think the American people have become more like tolerant, but also the strategists have adapted, and used that to build more of, hey, it's like Obama smoking weed and all that, like the picture of him in whatever college or where he was, like smoking weed, and it's like, oh no, see, he's just living his college days, like he's just like you, he's a normal person.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the strategy and how it's adapted. And I think that's interesting. It does say something about brands in general. Is like, okay, the meaning of a president, what does that mean to the American people of who should be sitting in that seat, right? Or who should be sitting in any type of seat of power, whether that is what I'm choosing to put in my home as a product or who I'm choosing to be president.
Yeah.
What I see the kind of connecting dots between a political brand and like a small business brand is like a brand is based off of promises. And if you look at any political campaign, it's a whole lot of promises. They're just spewing out.
Too many.
Too many promises.
It's all just promises.
And they're usually hyperboles, like everything from hope and change to build the wall. It's these huge, like, okay, what does that even mean? What does it entail? How is that possible? How is hope and change possible? How is building a giant, massive wall possible? What are the details to that, right? You're promising your audience something. Now, how are you going to fulfill that? Like, and that's what's so kind of funny about it is that in business world and in the real world where you're held accountable and you actually have a P&L statement at the end of the day, it's like you make promises to your customers, and if you don't fulfill that, the customer's knocking on your door and either wanting a refund or they're not coming back to you. And it's kind of your feet are more held to the fire. So from a brand standpoint, it's like when you make promises, you're held accountable by your customers because there's this direct transaction. And like what we talked about, there's a relationship there. And unfortunately, I feel with political brands, there's a lack of that accountability where things will get swept under the rug. Oh yeah, I did promise that, but hey, 4 years later, yeah, it didn't happen, whatever. But it's kind of this, the evolution of it where I think the American people, like, it's more and more holding that brand, aka those promises, more accountable, and that could really adjust where you see some of this campaigning and overall strategy going. Where it's like, how are these political brands actually going to make realistic promises that they fulfill? And again, like businesses, big or small, it's like you do make promises based off your brand, and that's what your marketing's putting out there. That's what you're advertising about, and how that actually is not just like. And again, in the business world, that'd be a con man would be selling you something and you're not fulfilling that side of the promise.
Yeah. And I think it's hard too, because it's a great comparison, like you brought up with, when you have broken promises or empty promises.
Yeah.
And now small businesses or business brands, right? They got no one to look. They've got nobody to blame for a broken promise other than themselves.
Yeah.
They're held by a higher standard by the consumer, because if you promise me that and you fall short, then you can't blame anybody.
No. Yeah.
So if you say 100% lifetime guarantee and somehow there's a problem and it's like, oh, well, except for this, right? Well, this is in our fine print on our blah, 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 and you signed our policy or whatever by making the purchase.
The fine print.
Okay, that's great. But in the end, that's going to, maybe deter me from continuing to engage in that brand.
Yeah. And so with both of them, you do have those promises with your business. With, on the political side, there's promises, but then also I think there's interesting correlation between like the stances that a politician makes in their brand and either what they need to take or what they personally are taking, and the positioning of a business in a market and what they stand for, or even what they are kind of leaning into as their distinction. And that's like what you said earlier, is like the brand, its uniqueness and distinction is what makes it so powerful. And I think going back to 2008 with Obama, his approach to just the visual system of the brand was distinct right off the bat.
When he was the first one wasn't he the first one that actually hired like a branding consultant,
Yeah.
And that no real candidate done that. And whether that decision was on him or probably his campaign manager, right? But it was a brilliant move.
Well, I think also he had the first, later on, I think they also had the first like digital social strategist, which is interesting of leveraging, because then you see how that played out of starting in, that was probably around 2010 when they got someone on board there. And then that's played out through these later campaigns with other candidates of how powerful social media has been.
Like embracing technology. I mean, I remember with Obama when he had announced his run, but he hadn't picked his running mate.
Oh.
And at the time it was kind of new, but he was like, it was almost like, you sign up and you'll get text updates the minute the runner-up was chosen. I mean, it was like engaging through text. Now, granted, this was, at the time, this was 2007, but that was still, not everybody had cell phone. A lot of people had, but it was, it's not what it is today, right?
Yeah,
Where we live, chained to our hip is our smartphone.
iPhone came out in 2007. So that's literally like on the...
There you go. So it was groundbreaking for Canada to go, hey, I'm going to embrace this. I'm going to embrace new technology, right?
Yeah.
And I guess it brings up to the point, when we were talking about, and I don't think we have numbers for obviously 2024 yet, but when we were looking at numbers for 2020, the last big, presidential election.
Yep.
Was it $16 billion? And this is, again, spread over both...
Presidential,
all parties, obviously primarily a Democrat and Republican, but about down. It looked like on the scales we were looking at, it was pretty about even, right? But it went from $6 billion in 2016 to doubled, and that's a huge amount of money going out for marketing and advertising, and always as we kind of go back and forth between, actual business branding, right, and political branding. It's like how does a new automaker, right, go against Tesla, or how does someone that's going to come up with a new computer or new piece of tech go up against a behemoth,
especially with the incumbent usually winning in the political realm. It's like, okay, yeah, they have the force behind them, but it is like the business market where it's like you have usually the big dog gets the bigger bite out of the market, but you do get the opportunity where you get the smaller, more nimble. We always talk about like the ships where they're able to pivot and get around and make quick turns. And when you are a smaller business, you're able to do that. And that really, like you said, it's like keeping that focus and having that clarity, and then able to go, okay, what value am I actually going to deliver? And that one by one of just growing that little by little. And you see some of these companies where it's like, that's what they've done. Like even Airbnb, how that started was the guys had some failed venture, and then they end up going, okay, well, we're already here. We're losing money. I think they're about to lose everything. And then they went to one of their friend's house and like started staying there. And then they took notes and listed it, and they went to the next one, and then they stayed there and made a little couple notes, and then they started putting it online and making it available because the other people were like, oh, sure, yeah, if someone wanted to stay here and pay us money, sure. And it was one by one by one by one, and they just started building that, and just became this marketplace of places to stay. And it was just slowly but surely, and again, not transactional, but like those relationships along the way. And even in the political sense, I feel like someone, if they actually did that, it would take a lot of energy, and you need some funding, but being able to go little by little of just building those relationships, I think someone could actually go against the, multi-billion-dollar behemoths that are out there.
Yeah. But I think it's with anything, it's like about, if political candidates are coming on this year and they come up with different ways of reaching potential voters, or trying to even reach across the aisle, if hypothetical, if Democrats are only focused on speaking directly to Democrats, right? Or maybe, and again, when we talk about political parties, we always talk about the aisle, right? There's the dividing line, but then you have conservative, you have moderate, you have in between. I even think, and this is my own, I'm an asterisk that this is my personal belief. I kind of wish, to be honest with you, that we would just do away with the party system, because for me, I'm not so in a bucket, and I might vote one way on one issue or feel strongly about one opinion about an issue and how we as populace should respond to that issue. And then I might feel differently, and it might be on the other side of the quote unquote aisle. Yeah. Right. And so I'm
how dare you?
I know, but I'm stuck in the middle. I find like so many times I'm stuck in the middle, and I wonder too is if we did that, right? If you obliterate, if voters didn't declare a party, and candidates were able to just talk to the nation
Yeah.
about issues and where they stand on issues. And then it's not so much that, well, because then you feel like you're aligning with your party rather than aligning with a candidate.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like we've gotten so far, especially.
It's so weird.
And this goes beyond opinion, because I think everybody would, that it's so divided. Our political system in the last 10 years has just, it's divided the country. And I think somehow if we were to get it back to the candidates being able to market themselves, right, brand themselves, but unattached to party lines, it would be probably a very different political landscape we would have.
It'd be much more human, because humans you can feel one thing about one statement, and then about another statement you can feel a different way, and that's human to be able to do that. And it's human to be able to change your mind too, of going, actually 2 years later I've changed my mind about this. That's totally fine. You don't have to say, well, I'm red for life or I'm blue for life. It's like that's illogical and completely just not human. And so even with businesses and brands in general, it's like realizing that your consumer, your voter, who they do vote for your business, and it's in dollars. It's like when they cast their vote and they're paying you, they're wanting to keep you in office and keep you in business. So it's like them being human and them having feelings, and actually you hearing that out and kind of really flexing to that is like, that's what a true, when you're serving them, just like our public servants should be serving us, it's like you are serving them. And
really?
That's how this works, right?
Is that how it's supposed to work?
It's not top to bottom, it's bottom to top.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, and again, human nature is part of being a brand. And that's what's so hard about some of these, situations of whether it is a political brand or even a large corporation that starts becoming very cold and just like not in tune with the human aspect of their consumers.
Yeah, for sure. I keep going back to, I think probably the biggest thing you've said this whole episode is just about brand and promises. And if we were going to wrap things up with any type of takeaway of application for branding in general, since Brandy is more about the business brand, not political brands, we kind of went off an offshoot today's episode, but I think it's the fact that a brand should make promises in what they're serving, what they or what they are offering to the consumer, making good on those promises, having clarity in what those things are, because that will build a better relationship with the consumer and their audience when they're able to imply a promise on something and make good on it.
Yeah, there's trust.
Yeah, it builds trust, for sure.
And that's, to me, like really the foundation of relationships. Like if you can't trust someone, then there most likely isn't a relationship. If anything, it's a very transactional relationship. And
right. And that
no
transactional relationship is what businesses do. Brands go beyond that. Beyond that, their concern is not about. Yes, there is concern for the transaction, but it's beyond that.
Yeah.
And that's why we talk about all the time about things like, if you're just focusing on the transaction, then yes, you're looking at the profit margin, you're looking at the bottom line, and cutting corners and doing all these things on just the transaction level. Yeah. That's going to give you max bang for your investment. Whereas brand goes beyond that. Brand says, hey, you need to invest in things that you're not going to get a transactional monetary return on. Yeah. Right. We've used this like Apple spending the time, energy, and development in just packaging even a new cable, right? A new lightning cable. You open up the box, you get it at Target, you open up the box, and it's just everything about it is just oozes quality and thoughtfulness in all the details. Yep. They didn't have to do it, but they do because it helps build a bigger and better, stronger brand. Yeah. Well, I think on that note, we've as the year progresses, it'll be interesting to see how campaigns and where all this money is going to be spent on ads and marketing campaigns. And so it'll be interesting to see where the dust settles at the end of this year and how things go at the polls. But I think talking about branding in politics and how they kind of coexist. It's always about the same thing applies to your business, doing things differently with clarity and building trust.
Well, until next time, cheers.
Cheers.